In the dead of night, under the relentless rain of the Victorian Highlands, a frail girl was dragged across the cold tile floor, her eyes wide, vacant, her mouth unable to scream. Behind the steel door where she had been drugged into silence for months, a hidden camera inside Emily's coat recorded everything. No one believed Lara was still alive, but when the live stream hit the internet, Australia held its breath. A girl presumed dead appeared, shaking, broken, but alive. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of our shocking, emotional, and chilling true story episodes. One click, and you'll join us in uncovering the secrets no one else dares to tell. The wind that night carried a strange kind of weight, thick, cold, and oddly silent, like something waiting to collapse. In a corner apartment near the University of Victoria's quiet East Campus, a window flickered with the dull blue glow of a desk lamp. Behind it, Laura Morgan sat hunched over a stack of clinical psychology textbooks, her dark hair in a loose braid, eyes red from too much caffeine and too little rest. Laura was 21, a third-year psych major with a sharp mind and a soft heart. She had the kind of quiet intensity that made professors remember her and made strangers pause for just a second too long. She was the kind of girl who asked the questions others didn't dare to, especially in class. But that night she didn't speak much. Her pen scribbled notes methodically. Her roommate Emily had already gone to bed, the apartment dim and still. It was nearly 10:45 p.m. when Laura closed her notebook, pulled on her oversized hoodie, and stepped out. Her last class had ended 2 hours ago, but she'd stayed behind to review material with a professor who agreed to stay late. She promised Emily she wouldn't be long. "Just a quick walk back," she'd texted. Rain began to fall not long after she left the library building. The droplets were icy, needles in the air. The street lamps threw blurry halos over slick pavement. Laura's sneakers made shallow splashes as she crossed the parking lot, phone clutched in one hand, the other shoved in her pocket. A few blocks from campus, near an alley she usually avoided, Laura glanced back. Then she disappeared. No screams, no shouts, no commotion. She was just gone. Emily didn't panic at first. She woke up at 1:30 a.m. and saw Laura's bed still empty. She assumed Laura was studying late again or had maybe crashed with one of her classmates. By morning, that hope had gone stale. No messages, no missed calls. Laura's phone went straight to voicemail. Emily called everyone, professors, classmates, even Laura's ex, but no one had seen her. By 9 a.m., Emily called the police. Detectives asked the usual questions. Was there a fight? Did she seem depressed? Was she using anything? Drugs, alcohol, anything unusual? The answer to all was no. Lara had been her usual self, focused, thoughtful, maybe a little exhausted, but always cautious. She avoided parties. She rarely stayed out late. Within 48 hours, missing person flyers with Laura's smiling face flooded local coffee shops, bulletin boards, and bus stops. Her parents flew in from Perth, eyes hollowed by fear. They stood in front of news cameras pleading for information. Social media exploded with hashtags and candlelight posts, knowing to find Lara Morgan. Emily barely slept. The apartment felt different, colder, emptier. At night, she swore she could still smell Laura's eucalyptus shampoo in the hallway. Her toothbrush still rested beside Emily's in the cup. Her charger was still plugged in. The phone never recovered. Police traced Laura's last known location using campus Wi-Fi logs. CCTV showed her leaving the building alone, walking in the rain with her head down. One camera picked her up, crossing the road near the art museum. After that, nothing. It was like she'd vanished into air. The days turned into weeks. Volunteers scoured parks, train stations, alleyways, even the abandoned warehouse district near South Bank. A few false leads surfaced. A woman matching Lara's description, seen at a petrol station. Someone reporting screams near Port Phillip Bay. But each one turned cold. 6 weeks after the disappearance, the media's interest began to fade. The banners on nightly news shows shrank. Journalists moved on to election debates and scandals. Even the police, overwhelmed with other cases, scaled down their task force. Lara's face, once burned into every mind across Victoria, started fading from memory. But not for Emily. She stopped going to classes, stopped answering calls. She spent her time combing through every piece of information she could find. Police logs, Reddit threads, message boards for amateur sleuths. Nothing made sense. Lara had no enemies, no erratic behavior, no suspicious connections. Emily kept the apartment exactly the same. She refused to clean Lara's desk or move her coat from the hook by the door. In some desperate way, it felt like preserving her roommate's place would anchor her to reality, keep her from dissolving completely into that cruel, unsolved gap. Then came the noises. They started faint. A soft click behind the wall at night. The sound of water running, though no tap was on. Once, Emily swore she heard a whisper, barely audible, like a breath echoing in the bathroom when she was alone. At first, she dismissed it. The mind plays tricks when it's grieving. But the feeling grew. Unease settled in her chest like a stone. One morning, while brushing her teeth, she noticed a hairline crack on the bathroom mirror. It had never been there before. She touched it, ran her finger along the edge. It felt wrong. Something buzzed in her mind, a quiet instinct pushing past her grief. She pressed her palm flat against the glass and heard the faintest click. That sound again. She stared hard at her own reflection. Then, acting on a hunch she couldn't explain, she tugged at the mirror's edge. It resisted. She pried it with the edge of a spoon from the sink drawer. With a sharp snap, the mirror came off the wall. Behind it, a tiny camera. Wires. A narrow black device with blinking red lights, hidden in the cavity between wall and plaster. For a moment she froze. Her mouth went dry. The toothbrush slipped from her hand. When she could move again, Emily backed out of the bathroom and shut the door. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She picked up her phone and called the police. The investigators returned. The discovery reignited the case. Forensic techs dusted the bathroom, dismantled the wall panel, and retrieved the camera. It had been installed with extreme precision, wired through the existing power lines, nearly undetectable unless you were looking. Inside the camera's storage drive, weeks' worth of footage. Not just Lara, not just the bathroom. Dozens of women, different angles, different apartments, different years. Some videos dated back nearly a decade. The apartment complex had never changed ownership, but tenants did. Young women came and went. Some stayed long, some left suddenly. A few had lodged noise complaints. One had left without a word, her security deposit never claimed. Emily's hands shook when she recognized Laura on screen. One clip showed her brushing her hair, completely unaware. Another showed her sitting on the edge of the bathtub, talking on the phone. Then there was the one that changed everything. Lara, half conscious, her head slumped against the tile. A figure, tall, hooded, reaching for her limp body, dragging her slowly out of frame. The room spun around Emily as the detective paused the video. This wasn't just surveillance, he muttered. This was a setup. A calculated abduction, filmed and hidden behind a mirror no one thought to question. Suddenly, the cold spots in the apartment made sense. Suddenly, the noises weren't in her head. The grief Emily had carried for 6 months cracked open into fury. This wasn't chance. This wasn't a bad night or a lost girl. Someone had taken Lara. Someone had watched her. Someone had lived just a wall away. The days after the camera discovery blurred like watercolors in a storm. Emily had thought she'd already hit her emotional limit, that after losing Lara, after screaming into pillows and punching bathroom tiles, there wasn't anything left in her to break. But the truth had a way of finding new cracks, new depths of horror. Because now it wasn't just grief. It was violation, paranoia, rage. The very mirror that she had used every morning for years, where she had plucked her eyebrows, put on mascara, and practiced smiling when she didn't feel like it, had been watching her. She started sleeping with the lights on, and even then barely slept at all. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind conjured Lara's limp figure being pulled away, pixelated and silent. Every time she showered, she checked the walls, behind the tiles, under the sink, inside the vent. The apartment was no longer a home. It was a crime scene, a shrine, a trap. The detective assigned to the case, Inspector Callum Fraser, was an older man with a clipped voice and tired eyes. He seemed genuinely shaken. "This level of concealment isn't amateur," he said on his second visit. "This isn't a college prank. It's engineered." The hidden camera had been expertly installed, not battery-operated like cheap spy gadgets sold online, but hardwired into the apartment's existing electrical system, feeding data wirelessly to a private server. When the forensics team extracted the drive, they found more than just video. They found access logs, and more importantly, a network path. One night, sitting at Emily's kitchen table under the humming fluorescent light, Callum tapped his laptop. His face hardened. The feed was being transmitted in real time to another unit, he said. In this building. Emily felt her throat close. What unit? She asked. He hesitated. Apartment 3B. She stared at him. Tom Hartley, she whispered. It wasn't a name she said often. No one really did. Tom was the quiet man at the end of the hall. Mid-40s, polite, kept to himself. He worked in electronics, people said. Freelance contracts, server repairs, maybe some government work. He had fixed Emily's toaster once, smiling softly while declining any payment. He didn't seem like someone capable of this. But Emily had already learned that monsters didn't need to snarl. Sometimes they smiled gently and held the door open. Callum called for a warrant. The next morning, Victoria police arrived in plain clothes. They didn't knock. They breached. Emily watched from behind a barricade of patrol cars, arms crossed tight over her chest. She hadn't spoken to anyone but Callum for days. Her hair was tied back, her face pale. Her eyes didn't blink. When the officers emerged, they carried boxes, laptops, external drives, cables, and something heavier, a black plastic tub marked private storage in faded tape. Callum approached her that afternoon, quiet and grim. There's more, he said, a lot more. Inside Tom Hartley's apartment, detectives found a private server rack with thousands of hours of footage. Bathrooms, bedrooms, dressing rooms. Not just in this building, not just in this city. He'd been doing it for years. Hidden cameras in walls, vents, light switches. Sometimes he used Bluetooth, sometimes hardwired frequencies, always cloaked, always quiet. But none of it mattered more to Emily than one particular folder, labeled Mirror 04, Inside Lara. Dozens of clips. Emily didn't watch them. She couldn't. But the detectives did. And they found the one moment that changed everything. 6 months ago, Lara brushing her teeth. She pauses, sways. Something's wrong. She reaches out, steadying herself on the sink. Then out of nowhere, she collapses to her knees. And just before the video cuts out, a shadow steps into frame. Gloved hands. A syringe. Fade to black. That was the last visual record of Lara Morgan. The footage had been time-stamped, geotagged, and encrypted, but not well enough. Callum's team traced the original IP address for the camera's remote feed. Every packet of data from Emily's bathroom mirror had been received and stored on a server linked to Tom Hartley's secured router. They cross-checked his router logs with cell tower pings from Lara's phone the night she vanished. They matched. That was enough for arrest. Tom Hartley was taken into custody just after dusk, as golden light poured over the windows of apartment 3B. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just lowered his head, placed his hands behind his back, and let the cuffs click shut. The moment was filmed. Emily watched the clip later that night on a news site. It should have brought her relief, but it didn't, because Lara was still gone. And even though they'd caught the man behind the mirror, they hadn't found what he'd done with her. She wasn't in the apartment. She wasn't in the footage beyond that single terrifying clip. There was no trace of her. No blood, no clothes, no belongings. Just silence. The media, of course, reignited. News anchors called it the mirror case. Social media was flooded again. Justice for Lara started trending. Journalists camped outside the building. But inside Emily's apartment, the atmosphere remained heavy and haunted. She stayed mostly indoors, eyes glued to her laptop. The more she read about hidden surveillance, the more disturbed she became. The scale of Tom's operation was monstrous. He'd targeted young women who lived alone, installed cameras through walls under the guise of maintenance or friendly neighborly help. He had maps, notes, names. And it had gone unnoticed for years. The forensic team, combing through his hard drives, recovered incomplete drafts of programs, facial recognition tools, sorting algorithms for cataloging subjects by time, place, and even emotional expression. It wasn't just perverse. It was systematic, calculated. Emily started having panic attacks. At night, she would jolt awake convinced someone was watching her. She threw out every mirror in the apartment. She covered the vents with duct tape. She unplugged the Wi-Fi. But something inside her wouldn't rest. There was one question that burned deeper than fear. Where was Lara? And why, in all that meticulous horror, did Tom only have one clip of her unconscious, but nothing after? Did he erase it? Or did someone else take her from there? Emily called Callum every day. Sometimes he picked up, sometimes he didn't. She knew the investigation was still open, but momentum was slowing again. The warrant had led to answers, but not resolution. and Emily wasn't going to wait for another 6 months to pass in silence. So one afternoon, she went back to the bathroom. The frame that had held the mirror was still off the wall. The plaster had been peeled back for evidence collection, the wires exposed like veins beneath skin. She crouched down, ran her fingers along the edge. Something was there. A second wire, different color. It wasn't connected to the first camera. It led behind the toilet, up through the ceiling. Emily's heart raced. She called Callum. An hour later, a new team arrived. They traced the wire through the building's old ductwork, and what they found, tucked inside a locked maintenance closet on the 4th floor, changed the case entirely. A relay switch and a second transmitter, which meant Mekishe Mars. The mirror camera hadn't been transmitting directly to Tom's apartment. It had been bouncing the signal through an intermediary node. Why? Because someone had taught him how to hide better. This wasn't a solo obsession anymore. This was infrastructure, networked. Emily watched as the officers carried the device down the hallway. She stayed silent, arms wrapped around herself. For the first time in weeks, a terrible realization settled in her chest like lead. Tom Hartley may have taken Lara, but he hadn't acted alone. And someone else, maybe someone far more powerful, was still out there. Tom Hartley had always been there. Quiet, unremarkable, courteous in a way that felt a bit too clean. He lived in Unit 3B at the very end of the corridor where the hallway lights flickered in intervals, just far enough from everyone to go unnoticed, just close enough to always be within reach. Emily remembered the first time she met him. It had been a week after moving in with Lara. The old kettle in their kitchen had shorted, leaving a scorch mark on the wall outlet in a room full of smoke. She'd opened the door coughing and confused, only to find Tom standing outside already knocking. "I smelled something," he'd said. "Need help?" He came in, fixed the fuse box, and offered to replace the socket. He didn't charge them, just smiled and said, "If anything else acts up, knock on 3B. They never questioned him after that. In fact, everyone seemed to like Tom, if they noticed him at all. He was the kind of man who helped older tenants carry groceries but never asked questions, wore the same neutral clothes, never raised his voice, never had visitors. When police executed the warrant and entered his apartment, what they found destroyed that image forever. The place was surgical, not messy, not chaotic, organized, precise, intentional. Along the north wall of his living room was a built-in server rack, tall, black, humming softly, blinking in quiet patterns of green and amber. Next to it, 4 monitors, each mounted at slightly different angles, each running multiple windows of video playback. A desk lined with notebooks, circuit diagrams, heat maps of wireless signal strength in various buildings. The coffee table had a partially dismantled ceiling fan with what looked like a custom sensor fitted inside its casing. Wires, soldering tools, a drawer full of blank SD cards. And in the far corner of the room, beside a tall cabinet that required bolt cutters to open, was a locked metal case. Inside labeled drives, folders categorized by date, location, and subject initials. There were over 280 terabytes of stored footage. Most of it was raw, unfiltered, unedited, streaming directly from hidden cameras he had installed over the years, some through false walls, others embedded in vent ducts, smoke detectors, or even behind bathroom tiles coated with mirrored film. Women showering, changing clothes, sleeping, crying. Footage spanned more than a decade, and across at least 4 residential complexes in Melbourne and the Greater Victoria region. It was industrial-grade voyeurism, but more than that, it was obsessive. Tom had built his own surveillance network, one more efficient and invasive than some local police departments. He documented behavioral patterns, daily schedules, even emotional responses. A notepad recovered from the desk contained line-by-line observations. Subject LM tends to hum when anxious, checks mirror twice when leaving room, always texts roommate when home. Subject LM was Lara Morgan. The realization that he'd been tracking her with such detail made Emily physically ill. She vomited twice during her second interview at the station. Detective Fraser handed her a paper cup of water and didn't say anything. He didn't have to. They had enough now. Enough to arrest Tom, charge him, hold him. But the true impact came with a single video file recovered from a subfolder titled Special Archives. It had no title, just a timestamp, 11:17 p.m. March 3rd, the night Lara disappeared. The video begins in silence. Lara is seen entering her bathroom, dressed in an oversized hoodie, brushing her teeth. She rinses, spits, looks into the mirror, the mirror, and seems to hesitate for just a moment. Then she rubs her temple. She leans against the sink and slowly, staggeringly drops to the floor. Her knees buckle. Her body folds in on itself like paper. Within seconds, a man steps into frame. No visible face, gloved hands, calm, practiced movements. He kneels beside her, checks her pulse, lifts her shoulders. And then, something impossibly chilling. He looks into the camera, not at it, into it, as if to mark the moment, as if to tell whoever would one day find it, "I see you too." Then he lifts Laura off the ground, cradled in his arms like a child, and steps backward out of frame. The video ends. No transition, no fade, just the sound of water still dripping in the sink. Emily watched the clip once, only once. She barely made it through. It took every ounce of strength not to scream, not to smash the laptop in front of her. Her knuckles went white. Her lungs refused air. Tom had taken Laura. There was no more doubt. But the video didn't show where he went or what he did next. There were no other files, no footage of transport, no record of what vehicle he used, no GPS logs on the camera. It was as if Laura disappeared again, this time from digital space. Detectives began questioning Tom immediately. But Tom Hartley refused to speak. He invoked his right to silence. No lawyer, no explanation. Just an empty stare, hands folded neatly on the table. Even when shown the footage, even when faced with the evidence of his own files, he said nothing. His expression didn't change. No flicker of guilt, no panic. Just that same eerily calm presence he had worn the day he fixed the kettle. As if he was waiting for something. Or someone. The media exploded. News outlets splashed his name across headlines. The neighbor with 1,000 eyes. They compared him to digital predators, serial voyeurs, even Cold War spies. But the truth was somehow worse, because it wasn't about power or blackmail or fame. It was about control. Tom had built a world where he could watch without being seen. He curated lives from behind the glass. He observed, studied, manipulated. And Laura, she had become more than a subject. She had become a prize. Emily was called in again 2 days after the arrest, this time to view a second room. Not in the apartment, but in a rented storage unit 20 minutes away. Police had found the lease among Tom's papers. Inside, more monitors. Another desk. Another setup. A chair with restraints. A narrow bed with medical straps. And walls lined with acoustic foam. Gray, soft, suffocating. But no sign of Laura. Not even a strand of hair. Just evidence of presence. Gloves. Used syringes. A hoodie matching the one Laura was wearing in the video, folded neatly in a plastic bin. This was a staging area, a processing site, but not the final location. Detective Fraser now believed Lara had been moved, possibly drugged and relocated to another facility within hours of her abduction. They searched every property Tom had been connected to. Friends, family, ex-colleagues. No trace. That's when they found the receipts. One from a supplier in rural Victoria, medical-grade sedatives acquired under a false name. Another for a fuel purchase on March 4th, early morning 5:32 a.m. in a town called Neerim South. The direction east, toward the mountain ranges, toward places far from city surveillance, where few people traveled, where a girl could be hidden indefinitely. Emily, upon hearing this, stood in complete silence, and then said he didn't do this alone, because someone had to fund the properties. Someone had to fabricate the paperwork that labeled Laura as mentally unfit. Someone had to erase her name from every registry. Tom was the hands, but someone else had written the script. As the investigation deepened, so did the shadow. Because if a man like Tom, so ordinary, so familiar, could orchestrate something this horrifying for years without detection, then maybe the real horror wasn't just him. Maybe it was how easy it had been. Veronica Morgan had not cried since the funeral of her husband 6 years ago. Not when the cancer came back. Not when the nurses called her at 2:13 a.m. to say he didn't feel any pain. Not when the house grew too quiet and her daughter stopped smiling as often. But when she watched the video of Laura, her only child, falling to the bathroom floor, limp and silent, something inside her cracked so completely it no longer made sense to hold back. She collapsed in the hallway of the police station. Callum Fraser, standing nearby, didn't try to comfort her. He knew there were no words, no rehearsed lines for this kind of grief. He let her break in silence. It had been 6 months since Laura vanished. 6 months of emptiness, of casseroles left untouched by neighbors, of late-night calls from extended family saying, "You have to move on, Veronica," as if moving on were a train you could simply board. But she had always known. Her daughter wasn't dead. And now watching that clip, watching her child being taken while still breathing, Veronica found something stronger than despair. She found direction. That night, she stayed in Emily's apartment for the first time since Laura's disappearance. She sat on her daughter's bed, now neatly made and covered in dust she refused to wipe away. A candle burned in the corner. The lavender scent reminded her of Laura's shampoo. She was alive when he took her, Veronica whispered. I could see it in her hands, the way they curled when he lifted her. Emily nodded, her voice hoarse. I think she's still alive. The next morning, Veronica demanded access to everything the police had. I want the files, she told Callum. I want to see every second, every document, every GPS ping. You're not part of the investigation, he began to say. She cut him off. I'm her mother, and I'm the only one who hasn't stopped looking. He hesitated, then handed her a flash drive. It contained Laura's digital trail, what little remained. Phone logs, location data, transaction history. One line stood out. March 4th, 5:32 a.m., Nearham South Fuel Station. Purchase $64.91. It was a receipt the team had traced to Tom Hartley's alias, Martin Reeves. The license plate number on the transaction matched a white delivery van registered under a shell company tied to his former employer. It was the last known movement linked to Laura. Veronica stared at the screen. This wasn't random, she said. He had a plan. This van, it's a transport vehicle, not personal. He took her somewhere. She turned to Emily, eyes sharpened by a fire neither of them had felt in months. Help me. The two women spent the next 48 hours building a profile. They pulled satellite imagery of the area surrounding Nearham South. Forests, farms, back roads, old mental health facilities, some of them decommissioned. Veronica printed them out, circled possible sites, used a red string to mark routes and distances from the fuel station. She wasn't just thinking like a mother anymore. She was thinking like someone whose grief had weaponized into resolve. Meanwhile, the police continued to dig into Tom's background. He'd worked for a private firm, Clearsight Technologies, which had contracts with multiple health and surveillance facilities across Victoria. One of his last projects 3 years prior had involved infrastructure design and behavioral monitoring systems for long-term care homes. That's when the name Halberd Recovery Institute surfaced. An isolated psychiatric facility, hours east of Melbourne, nestled in the upper forest near Mount Baw Baw. On paper, it had been closed since 2017. But financial records said otherwise. Veronica wasn't the only one who noticed. Callum's team sent a unit to investigate. What they found was confusing. The building was intact, powered, secured by fences with functional motion sensors. Yet no patients were officially registered, no staff listed on payroll, no digital footprint in any health database. Only paper. And even that, when requested, came back blank. Callum sent a formal subpoena. The reply wire, facility inactive, premises under restricted lease for future redevelopment. But he didn't buy it. And neither did Veronica. I want to go there, she said. It's dangerous, Callum replied. We don't know who's operating that place. I don't care. Emily stepped forward. Then I'll go with her. At first, Callum refused. But something about the way Veronica looked at him, unblinking, like a woman who had already buried her fear, made him relent. He gave them aerial maps, points of access, and instructions. Don't enter the building, not without backup. They didn't promise anything. 2 days later, Veronica and Emily drove east. It was early morning, fog clinging to the winding roads like breath on glass. The trees grew thicker past Warrigal. The GPS lost signal twice, and every kilometer felt like descending into some forgotten corner of the world. They arrived at a clearing just after noon. The facility loomed ahead, gray, silent, institutional. Ivy crawled across one wing like veins. The gate was locked. The signage faded, but fresh tire tracks were visible in the gravel. Veronica's heart thundered. They stayed at a distance, binoculars in hand. No movement, but lights were on. Inside, through a third-floor window, they saw a figure, a woman in a white gown. She stood still, facing the wall. Her hair was long, her frame familiar. Then just as quickly, she turned and walked away. Emily gasped. And was that? Veronica didn't answer. Her eyes were wet. And in that moment, for the first time since Laura disappeared, hope returned like a scream through silence. Back in Melbourne, the police were still compiling the case against Tom Hartley. Forensic analysts had recovered data fragments from corrupted drives, some encrypted, some intentionally damaged. One fragment revealed a file manifest. One name, L. Morgan Red Class. The term Red Class was unfamiliar, but in the same manifest, several other names appeared, some with notes like R Class terminated 2020 and R Class on hold, Facility 02. They had stumbled upon a system, a classification model, one that implied Lara wasn't the only victim. Veronica returned to the station with her findings. The maps, the photos, the video stills. She's there, she told them. I saw her. I know it. Callum didn't argue. By now, he'd stopped treating her like a grieving mother. He treated her like a partner. A special task force was formed. Surveillance on Halberd Institute was authorized. In 48 hours, they would return, with warrants, with backup, with answers. But Veronica wasn't sure Lara could wait that long. That night back at home, she lay awake staring at the ceiling. A memory drifted in. Lara as a child, standing on a chair to reach the bathroom mirror, brushing her hair with a plastic pink brush. Do you think mirrors ever lie? She'd asked. Veronica had laughed then. No, baby, mirrors always show the truth. Now, years later, she knew better. Some mirrors were designed to hide things, to record, to watch. But sometimes, just sometimes, they could also reflect the parts of us that refuse to break. The GPS trail wasn't perfect, but it was just enough. After weeks of analyzing the metadata from Tom Hartley's recovered devices, fragmented location logs, fuel receipts, and time-stamped surveillance files, Detective Callum Fraser's team began piecing together the route he took the night after Lara vanished. March 4th, 3:12 a.m. Tom's white utility van, registered under a Shell Corporation, left Melbourne heading east. By 4:49 a.m., he was captured by a traffic camera at a rest stop on Princes Freeway. His face wasn't visible, but the plates matched. One frame showed the silhouette of something or someone slumped in the back seat, barely distinguishable in the grainy footage. Fraser slowed the clip frame by frame. Lara? They couldn't be sure, but he was convinced enough to keep going. The trail led them through the lush forests and winding back roads of Gippsland, past old farmland and long-forgotten mining towns, into a region where signal towers grew sparse and street cameras disappeared completely. It was here, nestled among the towering eucalyptus trees and fog-wrapped hills, that they found it, the Halberd Recovery Institute. Officially, it had been closed since 2017, marked as inactive in all public health records, no longer accepting patients, no longer funded by the state. But that didn't match what the satellite images showed. Fresh tire marks, active power lines, a low but steady heat signature from thermal drones. Someone was still there. Detective Fraser and his team drove up the winding gravel road, their unmarked SUVs hidden behind dense brush. They watched the facility from a safe distance, observing its patterns. Security cameras were active. Motion sensors blinked at the edge of the fence perimeter. A single white sedan exited the property each morning at 7:03 a.m., returned at 5:11 p.m. No markings. Tinted windows. No one else entered. No one else left. Fraser checked every registry. The address listed no tenants, no property managers. But the land was owned by a holding firm based in Perth, one that, after some digging, was discovered to have been purchased by another company 2 months prior. That company had ties to a chain of experimental care facilities shut down for malpractice in 2014. Everywhere they looked, there were walls, paper trails that looped in on themselves, leases signed with dead names, building permits for renovation with no actual work orders. The deeper they dug, the more obvious it became. Someone had worked very hard to make sure Halberd didn't exist. And that's what made it the perfect place to hide someone like Lara. Veronica, now fully entrenched in the investigation, paced the apartment like a strategist. She marked dates on the whiteboard, highlighted inconsistencies in time logs, compared Tom's previous routes to known psychiatric facilities across the state. This wasn't his first time, she said one night, her voice sharp. He knew the system too well. Emily sat nearby, staring at her laptop screen. Then maybe we need to stop looking at Tom like he acted alone. Fraser agreed. So they dug deeper, not into Tom's past, but into the system he worked in. Tom had previously been contracted as a subcontractor for ClearSight Technologies, a private security and data infrastructure company that had once handled monitoring systems for multiple high-security medical institutions. On paper, Tom's work was limited to hardware optimization. But internal memos told a different story. One report, leaked by a former whistleblower, referred to pilot projects in long-term compliance and patient behavior regulation. Another described autonomous biometric tracking installations. Emily translated, they were testing mind control through isolation. Veronica clenched her jaw. Or they were disappearing people legally. Armed with this, Fraser secured a new warrant, one that gave them the right to request internal audits from every facility that had once partnered with ClearSight. Halberd was one of them. But when the audit request went out, something strange happened. Silence. Emails bounced back. Phone numbers were disconnected. And the holding company that owned Halberd? It filed for bankruptcy the next morning. Coincidence? Fraser didn't think so. So he changed tactics. He tracked down a former employee who had once worked at Halberd, years before the supposed shutdown, a nurse named Evelyn Sharp. She was living in Mo, a small rural town north of the Institute, retired, off-grid. At first, she refused to talk, but when Veronica showed her a photo of Laura, young, bright-eyed, standing in front of her university, Evelyn went pale. "I've seen her," she whispered. "Where?" Veronica demanded. Evelyn hesitated. She wasn't herself. What do you mean? She was brought in drugged, quiet, blank. They called her Red Case. I was told she'd been diagnosed with persistent delusional disorder. But she didn't speak like someone delusional. She asked me to help her escape. Veronica's heart thudded. "I did you?" Evelyn looked away. They transferred her after 3 days. Night move, no paperwork, no ambulance, just a van. Veronica's voice trembled. "When?" "March 7th. 3 days after Laura disappeared." Fraser leaned forward. "Where did they take her?" Evelyn shook her head. "I don't know, I swear. But it wasn't the first time they did that." Fraser pressed. "Who gave the orders?" Evelyn answered with a name. Dr. Nathan Voss, a psychiatrist once hailed as a pioneer in trauma rehabilitation, until his license was revoked quietly in 2015 for procedural violations. He had vanished from the public eye since then. Now his name was tied to Halberd and to Lara. Fraser issued a nationwide alert. But Voss was a ghost. His addresses were outdated. His medical certifications were revoked. But the money trail? That was still warm. Bank records revealed large transfers between shell corporations, all looping back to a private trust registered in New South Wales. The trust had recently acquired a small, unregistered property further east, deep in the Great Dividing Range. Too remote for regular patrols, too quiet for neighbors. A perfect place to bury a secret. Fraser stared at the coordinates, heart pounding. If Lara was alive, if she had survived the first transport, then that remote property might be where she was now. But time was slipping. He assembled a tactical team. No sirens, no warning. They would approach at dawn. Veronica insisted on going. Fraser refused. "I've waited 6 months," she said. "You've seen what they're capable of. You think I trust this to the system?" He didn't argue again. Emily stayed behind. She lit a candle in the apartment. "Come home," she whispered. "Come home, Lara." The fog was thick that morning, clinging to the pines like secrets too ashamed to rise. Emily sat in the passenger seat of an unmarked rental car, her ID badge freshly laminated and clipped to the breast of a pale blue button-down. Her hair was tied back, her hands trembling. The badge read, Samantha Reese, Administrative Auditor, Victorian Board of Mental Health Facilities. It was a fake, but convincing. Veronica sat beside her, silent, eyes locked forward, jaw set like granite. She had wanted to go in herself, but Fraser insisted. "They'll know you," he warned. "Let Emily do this. One shot, no second chances." They'd rehearsed the story a dozen times. A surprise spot check on patient intake protocol, budget compliance, staff rotations, the kind of bureaucratic scrutiny that sent under-the-table clinics scrambling to look clean. The gate buzzed them in. 2 security guards eyed them, but neither asked questions. One led Emily to the front office, where an older woman in a beige cardigan greeted her with the kind of tight smile reserved for tax auditors and funeral directors. "I wasn't aware of any scheduled inspection," she said. "That's the point," Emily replied smoothly, placing a clipboard on the desk. "We're piloting unannounced visits. Keeps the paperwork honest." The woman frowned but nodded. "Well, I suppose I can give you a tour." Inside, the facility smelled like bleach and lavender. The halls were too quiet, too clean. Patients moved like ghosts, slow and medicated. The lights hummed with artificial calm. As they passed the east wing, Emily's throat tightened. A figure sat at the end of the hallway, near a locked door. Long hair, pale arms, a hospital gown too loose for her frame, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She looked up, eyes that once sparkled behind glasses. Now blank, hollow. Lara. Emily stopped. Her heart cracked open, her breath caught. But before she could speak, one of the guards barked, "This area is restricted." Emily blinked. "I thought this was an administrative pass-through." The woman beside her, clearly nervous now, shook her head. "Patients under red class aren't allowed contact with external personnel." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. She's catatonic. Why is she here?" "She's under observation," the woman replied too quickly. "Severe delusional disorder, violent self-harm history, no listed family." Lara didn't blink, didn't move. Then barely her fingers twitched. "A signal?" Emily stepped forward. "Lara?" But before she could take a second step, the guards closed in. Rough hands gripped her shoulders. "You need to leave, now!" The ID badge slipped from her shirt and hit the floor. The woman in the cardigan's eyes darkened. "You're not an auditor, are you?" Emily didn't answer. They dragged her out. She didn't fight, because fighting would have meant not seeing Lara at all. Outside, Veronica rushed to the car, breath frozen in her lungs. "Did you see her?" Emily nodded, face streaked with tears. "She's in there. She's alive. But something's wrong. She didn't even recognize me until the end. Then I swear she tried to move." Veronica pressed her palms to her mouth. She had never prayed before, but now she did. Back in Melbourne, Callum slammed his fist on the conference table. "That place has no patient records in any database. Not private, not public. Their security cameras aren't even connected to any regulatory system." He turned to his tech officer. "They're running an internal loop," she confirmed. "Every camera deletes its feed after 12 hours. No backup, no cloud, no audit log." Veronica stepped in. "They claim she had no family." "They always do," Callum growled. "That's how they keep them, by erasing every thread to the outside." Fraser filed an emergency petition for an investigation. But 2 hours later, the request was denied. "No legal standing," the email said. "The facility holds a private operating license with autonomy over patient classification. Family claimants must prove guardianship." Veronica stared at the words. "No guardianship," she whispered. "She's my daughter," she said louder. "She's mine." But in the eyes of the system, Lara Morgan had ceased to exist. Officially, she had never been checked into Halberd. Unofficially, she was now labeled as Patient 43R. RR for Red Class. Emily dug into the term. Red Class patients were ghosts. Those labeled too dangerous, too unstable, or too compromised to reintegrate. No visitation, no documentation, no consent required. Legal limbo. Veronica stormed into Fraser's office. "You said this was going to end," she snapped. "I said we were close." "She's in there. She looked at me. What else do you need?" Fraser stared at the photo Emily had managed to snap. A blurry image from her phone just before being forced out. Lara, pale and rigid, eyes distant. "She's been drugged," he said, "and kept isolated." Veronica's voice dropped to a whisper. "She's going to forget who she is." Fraser clenched his jaw, then stood. "Wait, we'll go back. Not with paperwork, not with questions. With answers." Emily and Veronica met that night in the old university library, Lara's favorite study spot. They sat beneath a skylight, surrounded by walls of old case law and procedural archives. Emily tapped her laptop. "There's precedent," she said. "In 2009, a woman named Grace Elliott was found locked in a psychiatric clinic for 8 months under a false identity. Her release came only after a journalist published classified footage. So we exposed them?" Veronica asked. Emily nodded. "Even if we can't get her out with the law, we break the door with truth." Fraser pulled every favor he had. Within 48 hours, an independent media outlet agreed to investigate. A whistleblower site agreed to publish the footage Emily had captured. Anonymous sources came forward, ex-employees of Halberd. One nurse claimed to have seen Lara in the facility. Another said Red Class patients were never meant to recover, only be silenced. The pressure built, a fire they couldn't extinguish. But the Institute pushed back. They released a statement to the press. "All patients under Red Class classification are in critical psychiatric condition. Unauthorized access or contact risks patient destabilization and violates health protection codes. We will not respond to smear tactics." Veronica read the words aloud. "They're calling her a danger. Fraser's phone rang. His contact at the regulatory board whispered, "They're planning a patient relocation tonight, all red class." Emily froze. "They're going to move her." "To where?" Veronica asked. The answer chilled them. "Off the books." The truth had teeth, and Veronica Morgan was done being bitten by silence. 3 days after Emily's forced removal from Halberd and the facility's vague press statement, Veronica walked into the polished office of Melbourne-based human rights attorney Louise Farrell with a single manila folder and the weight of 6 months' fury burning behind her eyes. Inside the folder, screenshots of her daughter from the facility, copies of denial letters from mental health boards, the original missing person flyer, and a printed still from the surveillance video. Lara's limp body being carried out of her own bathroom. Louise didn't blink as she flipped through the stack. "They forged every trace," Veronica said. "They erased her from the world." Louise leaned back. "Then we traced the lie." The legal path was narrow, jagged with institutional protection and redacted records. But Louise was relentless. Within 72 hours, she had subpoenaed archived admission logs, historical employee rosters, and financial audits from Clearsight Technologies and their known affiliates, including shell companies tied to defunct psychiatric operators across Victoria. One pattern emerged like a bruise in an X-ray. Lara Morgan had been admitted under the name Elise Harrow, with a birth date 1 year off, a fabricated case history, and a diagnosis of persistent delusional paranoia with violent tendencies. The signature on the intake form? Dr. Nathan Voss. The facility that admitted her? Halberd Institute. The date? March 4th, the morning after her disappearance. Veronica stood over the documents in stunned silence. Her daughter had been erased and rebuilt on paper, turned into a danger to herself and others, with no next of kin, no legal recourse, no voice. "How is this even possible?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. Louise pointed to the bottom of the page. "See that reference code?" Veronica squinted. "CST V03. Clearsight Technologies version 3 compliance system," Louise said. "That means this wasn't just medical fraud. It was systemized, engineered." That's when Fraser stepped in. They'd been chasing threads, but now they had a tapestry. A dark, deliberate operation that began years earlier, when Tom Hartley was more than just a freelance technician. He had been lead systems architect for Clearsight's behavioral surveillance division. His specialty? Internal biometric tracking and data masking protocols. Among his patents was a line of code labeled Ghost Identity Mode. In layman's terms, he built a way to make a person disappear in plain sight, assign them a new identity within private medical systems, block any outside lookup requests, and erase their connections with state databases. "It's a digital coffin," Fraser muttered. "You bury someone in bureaucracy. No grave needed." Tom hadn't just watched people. He'd erased them. Veronica sat for a long time in Louise's office after that, silent, her hands clenched in her lap. "She begged for help," she finally whispered. Louise turned. "What?" Veronica pulled out a small audio file. Emily had secretly recorded part of her visit to Halberd before being dragged away. Most of the recording was ambient noise, hallway footsteps, beeping machines. But one moment, just 5 seconds, cut through the static like a scream buried in snow. A soft, cracked voice. "Help me! Please! Don't let them!" Then a sharp click and silence. Lara. Drugged, weak, but fighting. Still alive. Louise played it 5 times before speaking. "We release this. We bring in the press." "No," Veronica said. Louise looked surprised. "Why not?" "Because they'll move her, again." Veronica leaned forward, her voice razor sharp. "We don't just reveal them, we trap them. On their own terms." Fraser took the evidence and returned to his department with fire in his chest. That afternoon, he received a call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was hesitant, brittle. "My name is Asha Patel," it said. "I used to work at Halberd. I saw what they did to her." Fraser met her at a parking garage in Dandenong. She wore sunglasses despite the clouds, her fingers twitching as she handed him a sealed envelope. Inside, printed reports, internal memos, daily logs, handwritten notes. The files documented Lara's first 2 weeks at Halberd, under the alias Elise Harrow. They detailed her resistance to medication, her request to call someone named Emily, her attempts to communicate with staff. "She wasn't delusional," Asha said. "She was desperate, begging. She knew what was happening to her. But they strapped her down, said it was part of the detox." Fraser flipped to one entry. Day 4, patient attempted escape. Alarm triggered. Patient sedated via IM. Isolated in room 7B. No external contact permitted. Asha's voice cracked. I held her hand when they tied her to the gurney. She was crying, asking if her mom was looking for her. Fraser closed his eyes. Why are you coming forward now? Because I thought she was gone, Asha whispered. But I saw the photo. That blurry image on the news. She's still alive. She hesitated. There's something else. The injections. They weren't just sedatives. They called it a compliance cocktail. It messes with memory, dissociation, makes them forget who they are. Veronica's worst fear confirmed. Fraser took the files to Louise. Together they began preparing the case, but time was against them. Asha's warning was clear. They'll transfer her again if they suspect exposure. And there was another layer, darker, more strategic. Tom's system, Louise discovered, had a failsafe, a shutdown protocol embedded into the Red Class software. If certain conditions were met, legal threat, public exposure, whistleblower detection, the system triggered a silent alert to administrators. Within hours, patients could be removed. Gone. Erased all over again. Veronica pressed her palms to her temples. They're going to bury her alive. No, Fraser said. Not this time. They needed a diversion. Something so large, so irreversible, that Halberd wouldn't be able to move fast enough. So they staged a leak. Louise fed selected files to a journalist from the Herald Sun, including the intake logs, Asha's notes, and Lara's alias records. The article was scheduled for release in 72 hours. They launched a countdown. On the surface, silence. Behind the scenes, chaos. Halberd's lawyers sent cease and desist letters. Clearsight threatened counterclaims. The Department of Mental Health issued a vague statement about respecting private care protocols. But the public? They were beginning to stir. Online forums exploded. Whereas Lara started trending again, anonymous sources began posting new documents. Old patient families spoke out. A former intern uploaded blueprints of Halberd's underground wings, sealed rooms not shown in public maps. And then, 48 hours before the article's release, Fraser's team intercepted an encrypted message. Internal directive. Initiate transfer protocol R-Class 43H0200 Lara. They were going to move her at 2 p.m. Fraser dropped the printout on Veronica's desk. This is it, he said. She didn't speak. Just stood, eyes hard, heart steady. Then we go tonight. The rain had started 2 hours before they arrived. Thin at first, then steady, then pounding like hammers against the windshield. It was the kind of rain that turned roads into rivers and silence into static. Veronica gripped the steering wheel tighter as their SUV crawled along the overgrown gravel path leading to Halberd's rear service entrance. The forest around them loomed dark and dripping, headlights slicing through the fog like knives through old linen. Emily sat beside her, dressed in black, hood up, hands shaking. In the back seat, Dean Rowley, a retired police lieutenant with a scar across his left cheek and eyes like granite, finished loading a taser, 2 flashlights, and a compact comms radio into his gear bag. He didn't speak much. Didn't need to. He'd been brought in by Fraser, off the record, no badge, no backup. A man called when the system broke down, and someone still had to kick the damn door open. At exactly 1:26 a.m., they killed the headlights. Dean stepped out first, scanning the tree line, then motioned for them to follow. The rear fence of the facility was poorly maintained, just as they'd hoped. Fraser's contact had slipped them a schematic. Weak spots in the wiring, blind spots between camera sweeps, power relay boxes not buried deep enough. At 1:34 a.m., Dean popped the main feed with a magnetic disruptor the size of a car key. Every camera on the north wing blinked out. They had 12 minutes. Inside, the building was colder than expected. Damp, quiet. The lights buzzed faintly overhead, powered by backup generators still humming from last week's storm. The scent of disinfectant was thick, but beneath it was something else. Mold, mildew, fear. Veronica led the way. Emily followed, gripping the mini body cam strapped to her chest. It was live streaming straight to an encrypted cloud account Louise had set up that afternoon. Anything they saw would be uploaded in real time. If they didn't make it out, someone would. Room 7B. That's what Asha had said. Bottom floor, west wing, no windows. Heavy door with external locking bolts. They found the hallway just as the emergency lights flickered overhead. Somewhere deep in the building, a siren chirped once, then stopped. Motion sensor reset, Dean whispered. We've got company coming soon. They picked up the pace. The hallway stretched like a throat toward darkness. Then at the end, room 7B, Veronica reached it first, her palms pressed to the cold metal. She heard it. Breathing. Faint, uneven. Dean used a lockpick gun. The bolts clicked open one by one. Emily's camera shook. The door creaked open. And there, curled on a narrow cot, hair matted, wrists red from old bindings, eyes flickering under half-lowered lids, was Lara. Veronica gasped. Lara? The girl flinched, backed up to the wall. Her lips moved, but no sound came. Baby, it's me, Veronica whispered, stepping forward. It's Mom. I'm here. Emily pressed the camera closer. The stream caught everything. The cracked tiles, the IV bags still hanging, the restraints folded on a nearby tray, and Lara, alive but ghost-like, a shell of the fierce, bright student she'd once been. Dean stepped in. We need to move. They pulled Lara gently from the cot. Her legs barely held. Emily wrapped an arm around her waist, whispering promises through tears. You're safe. We're here. It's over. It wasn't. Behind them, shouts. Footsteps. A red emergency light snapped on at the far end of the corridor. Dean swore under his breath. Go, now! They ran. Emily and Veronica half-carried Lara as the hallway lit up in pulsing red. Sirens began to blare. Doors slammed. Security boots thundered down stairwells. Dean turned at each corner, taser drawn. When a guard rounded the hallway shouting, he fired. The man dropped like a stone. They kept running. Emily's chest burned. Her boots slipped on the wet tile. Lara groaned in her arms, muttering something about the lights. Her words slurred, disconnected. Behind them, more voices, closer. Dean shoved open a side exit, slammed a chair under the handle. Buy us 30 seconds, he muttered. They burst into the rain. It hit them like cold glass, washing over their skin as they stumbled toward the fence. The SUV was still hidden, engine idling. But it was too far. A spotlight snapped on. They were seen. Keep going, Dean barked. Emily didn't stop. The live stream continued, capturing everything. The soaked grass, Lara's face pressed against Veronica's shoulder, the shadowy figures chasing them through the mist. Then a horn. Headlights. Another vehicle. Fraser. He'd come anyway. His car screeched into the mud. 2 officers jumped out, firing warning shots into the air. The guards froze. Dean reached the SUV, yanked the back door open. Veronica and Emily shoved Lara inside. Go! Someone screamed. Tires spun. Mud flew. They tore down the hill, lights off, engine howling against the wet road. Inside, Emily held Lara's face, brushing away rain and tears and blood. You're okay. You're safe. We got you. But Lara just stared at her, not seeing. Not yet. The live stream ended at 2:07 a.m. At 2:19 a.m., the first clip went viral. By morning, 3 million people had watched it. By noon, news helicopters circled Halberd. By evening, the facility had been shut down under federal order. The sun rose over Victoria like it hadn't in months, cutting through fog, cloud, and a darkness that had once seemed permanent. By 6:45 a.m., the gates of Halberd Recovery Institute were sealed with yellow tape. Armed officers stood guard as investigators in blue windbreakers stepped through the wreckage of a nightmare. Journalists swarmed the perimeter, microphones pointed like weapons toward any open mouth. At 7:30, the Minister of Health gave a press conference, voice tight, face ashen. The Halberd facility, she said, has been operating in gross violation of medical ethics and human rights. Effective immediately, it is permanently shut down. What followed was a storm. Government inquiries, emergency audits, policy overhauls. Within 48 hours, 7 more private psychiatric centers across Victoria were ordered to halt operations pending full investigation. The Department of Justice created a new task force focused on data-masked patient fraud, named after Lara, Operation Morgan. But the heart of it all, the spark that lit the fire, was the arrest of Tom Hartley. He was taken from his cell and walked, handcuffed, through a hallway packed with reporters and flashing cameras. For the first time, his face was stripped of neutrality. He flinched at the lights. He looked down. He'd been charged with 1 count of aggravated kidnapping, 5 counts of unlawful imprisonment, multiple counts of electronic surveillance without consent, conspiracy to falsify medical records, fraudulent use of state health systems, violation of privacy laws affecting minors and vulnerable populations. And more were coming. His apartment had been gutted, every hard drive combed through, every line of code dissected by cybercrime units. They found patterns, links to missing person cases dating back nearly a decade. Some victims had been returned, others never found. In a chilling twist, at least two families had received anonymous messages over the years, suggesting their loved ones were better off where they couldn't be hurt again. It was a lie. A beautiful, monstrous lie wrapped in clinical language and sealed by silence. But for Lara, the rescue wasn't an ending. It was another kind of beginning. Fragile, uncertain, almost unbearably quiet. She had been out of Halbert for 5 days when she finally opened her eyes in the rehabilitation ward of St. Vincent's Hospital. The lights were dim, the windows drawn, a sketch pad on the table beside her. She didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't ask where she was. Instead, she reached for a pencil and began to draw. The first image was a rectangle, no wider than a mirror, with eyes sketched inside. Dozens of them, all different sizes, watching. The next was a door with no handle. Then a girl with no face. Veronica sat beside her every day, reading softly from old storybooks. Emily brought her lavender oil and music they used to listen to in college. Lara responded only with drawings, each one more abstract, each one a little closer to language. A spiral staircase inside a brain. A locked box with a screaming mouth. A silhouette slumped against a wall, dripping tears that turned into barbed wire. The doctors called it selective mutism, tied to dissociative trauma. They warned Veronica, it may take months, maybe years. She's protecting herself. Veronica didn't care. She was alive. That was enough for now. But the world outside wasn't waiting. Media headlines screamed for answers. How had a system built to protect become a prison? Why had no one noticed the signs? Who else was still missing? And everywhere Lara's name was mentioned, so was Tom Hartley's. His arraignment was scheduled for the following week. Louise Farrell, now working closely with the prosecution, stood before the court and read a list of evidence so damning it silenced even the most cynical reporters. This was not an isolated crime, she told the judge. It was a network, a method. And he built it. Tom didn't respond, not once. His defense team tried to argue diminished responsibility, paranoia, delusions of grandeur, but no one bought it. The footage was too clear, the logs too deliberate, the victims too real. And Lara? She became the symbol of what had been buried. One of her drawings, an image of a girl standing at the edge of a forest, one hand reaching toward the light, was published by The Age. It became the unofficial emblem of the investigation. But for Emily, the image that haunted her most was the one Lara had drawn just for her. A simple sketch. 2 stick figures, one holding the other's hand. No faces. Just that quiet connection. That was the first time Lara made eye contact since Halbert. She didn't speak, but she smiled. And that smile broke Emily completely. Fraser continued his crusade, testifying before Parliament. He described the loopholes Tom had used, how private institutions operated without oversight, how digital identities could be altered, how rogue actors could disappear someone with a few keystrokes and a well-placed signature. And it worked. Legislation passed. An emergency reform bill required all psychiatric facilities to integrate with a centralized database accessible to registered family members. Anonymous patient identities were outlawed without judicial review. All surveillance infrastructure had to be externally audited every 6 months. They called it Lara's Law. But Veronica didn't want the credit. I don't want her name to mean pain, she said in an interview. I want it to mean return, survival. That even when they try to erase you, love remembers. At night in the quiet of her home, she would often sit by Lara's bedside and whisper, they tried to take you, but you found your way back. Lara never answered, but she listened. And sometimes when the light was soft enough, she would reach out and squeeze her mother's hand. The world didn't get closure. There were still cases, still names, still stories buried in server logs and broken minds. But Lara's story was no longer just tragedy. It was testimony. Proof that even when darkness had a face and power had tools sharper than steel, one mother, one friend, and one broken girl could pull back the curtain. And behind it, a door with a handle after all. The road to Lara's hometown stretched long and silent beneath a sky the color of softened slate. After weeks in the hospital, Emily finally asked the question she'd been afraid to say aloud. Do you want to go home? Lara didn't speak. She didn't nod. She just placed her hand on Emily's, as if her silence was a yes the world hadn't yet learned how to translate. So Emily packed a weekend bag with warm clothes, soft scarves, Lara's sketchbook, and the lavender-scented lotion she used to love. They left Melbourne just before dawn. The traffic thinned as the city dissolved into misty hills and quiet fields, until finally the skyline became nothing but trees. The house stood on the edge of a hill near Macedon, overlooking a long stretch of rolling land and sky. It hadn't changed much. The paint peeled a little more at the edges, but the heart of it remained. Veronica had been tending the grounds for years, though she never stayed long since Lara disappeared. But something pulled her there now. Something old. Something buried in the soil. Behind the house, the lavender garden. It had once been her husband's pride. He planted it in staggered rows, each one labeled with a year, each bloom a memory. Lara used to run barefoot between them, staining her fingers purple, burying her face in the blossoms until she sneezed from the pollen. It was still there. A little wilder, a little tangled, but alive. Emily led Lara through the side gate, the scent already rising through the morning air. Lara hesitated, then took one slow step forward. The moment her foot touched the damp earth between the rows, she stopped, looked up, and something in her face, tight for weeks, clenched behind layers of trauma and medication, loosened. Her eyes shimmered, her lips parted, and for the first time since her rescue, she cried, not the silent weeping of someone lost, but the deep shaking sobs of someone beginning to remember. Emily didn't move, didn't speak. She just let Lara break. And when Lara finally collapsed onto her knees, hands buried in the lavender, pressing the flowers to her face like a child trying to inhale the past, Emily knelt beside her and held her. For hours, they didn't go back inside. Veronica watched from the porch with her arms crossed over her chest, tears soaking into her sweater. And when the sun began to warm the fog away, Lara stood, unsteady, new, and walked the garden again. The healing began there. It wasn't quick. It wasn't linear. But it was real. Over the next several weeks, Emily and Veronica turned the house into a sanctuary. No hospitals, no reporters, no police. Just long walks, soft meals, quiet music, and hours by the fireplace where Lara sat sketching. Always sketching. Her lines were sharper now, her colors richer. She still didn't speak much, but the silence felt different. Not fearful, not frozen. Intentional. Focused. Her first complete piece was a depiction of the lavender field, but in the center, a figure sat with her back turned, hair wild, surrounded by hundreds of tiny violet eyes. Veronica framed it, then sent it to a local gallery. They called within the hour. "She's remarkable," the curator said. "We want to feature her work." The exhibition was quiet, intimate. Titled After the Silence, it opened on a rainy Thursday night in Melbourne, with only a soft banner out front and 27 of Lara's pieces displayed on cream-colored walls. Each one told a part of the story no one else could. A hallway lined with mirrors, each one cracked. A mouth sewn shut, surrounded by scribbled phrases in dozens of languages. A girl made of paper walking through fire. Visitors came quietly, respectfully. Many wept. Some left notes at the guestbook table. "Thank you for surviving. I see you now. You gave me courage." Lara attended the exhibition once. She wore a long-sleeved dress and stood in the far corner, away from the light. Emily stood beside her, fingers linked loosely. Veronica stood a few steps behind, watching every breath like it might disappear again. When one woman approached Lara, nervous, shaking, she whispered, "My daughter was taken in 2012. I never got her back. But tonight, I feel like I found a piece of her." Lara didn't respond, but later in the car, she handed Emily a drawing. It was of a candle in a cave, a single flame. Veronica, meanwhile, had been writing. For weeks, she filled a small leather notebook with every thought she hadn't had the strength to speak. Every day of Lara's disappearance, every piece of news, every headline, every prayer she had cursed into the void. Then she rewrote it, not as tragedy, but as testimony. She called it The Mirror and the Garden. Part memoir, part guide, part warning. In it, she spoke to parents, not as a politician or a survivor, but as a mother who had stood in the gap between belief and despair and chosen belief. She wrote, "They will tell you to accept the silence, that it means your child is gone, that the world is big and people vanish and there is nothing left to find. But silence is only the absence of permission, not truth, not presence. If you are still listening, they are still calling." The book was published 6 months later. It sold out in 3 days. Not because of marketing, not because of controversy, But because it spoke to something no one had ever dared to write plainly, that belief was an act of defiance. And defiance, when rooted in love, could resurrect the vanished. Laura's recovery continued in layers. She started whispering, first to Emily, then to herself. One day, Veronica walked past her room and heard humming. An old melody, one her father used to sing while planting lavender. Veronica stopped, leaned against the door, and let the sound carry her somewhere safer than memory. On Laura's 22nd birthday, they baked her a cake. She smiled when Emily smeared frosting on her nose. She laughed, soft and hoarse, but real. That night, she gave them both a drawing. 3 women, one older, with a pen, one younger, with a camera, and in the middle, a girl made of sky holding a mirror in her arms like a shield. The title, Return. The trial lasted 24 days. Every second of it carried the weight of years stolen, voices erased, and the faces of those who were never meant to be seen again. The courtroom was packed. Victims, families, reporters, strangers who had followed Laura's story as if it were their own reflection waiting to be recognized. Tom Hartley sat stone-faced throughout, dressed in a gray suit that hung off his frame like borrowed skin. He never took the stand, never apologized, never explained. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke louder than he ever could. There were the files, hundreds of gigabytes worth of footage, logs, transfer forms, falsified psychiatric evaluations, all bearing his fingerprints. There were the victims. 5 of them came forward, each with their own version of the same horror. Some had escaped. Some had been cured, but none had been believed, not until Laura. And there was Laura herself. She didn't testify, but her drawings were submitted as evidence. 24 pieces, each one corresponding to a phase of her captivity. The girl in the hallway of eyes, the cage with no door, the woman made of glass, cracking at the edges. Her art was a testimony written in silence, and the jury listened. On the final day, the judge, a woman in her late 50s with 2 daughters of her own, read the verdict aloud with a voice that trembled only once. Thomas Allen Hartley, you are hereby sentenced to 38 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The room didn't erupt. It exhaled. Veronica closed her eyes. Emily squeezed her hand. And somewhere deep inside, a soul still learning how to rebuild, Laura smiled. But the story didn't end there. The conviction opened floodgates. The federal inquiry into psychiatric institutions across the country uncovered a pattern. A system of concealed patients, ghost identities, and falsified records that stretched beyond Halberd. At least 37 individuals had been hidden in similar facilities over the past 15 years. Some had died. Others had been moved so many times their paper trail no longer existed. A full-scale investigation was launched. Whistleblowers came forward. One former administrator admitted under oath, "We were told to prioritize institutional discretion over individual autonomy, especially for those labeled R-class. It was about containment, not care." The government responded. New laws were passed, emergency ethics councils formed, and multi-agency audits mandated every 6 months. Victim compensation funds were established, though Veronica later said, "There's no refund for being erased." Still, the country watched. And from that watching, a movement grew. The core of it wasn't policy or outrage. It was a girl with haunted eyes and a sketchbook full of scars. She spoke publicly for the first time 9 months after her rescue, at a women's rights conference in Sydney, held in a converted opera house beneath high glass windows and white spotlights. She wore a navy coat, carried nothing but a folded piece of paper. Her voice was quiet, measured, but unbreakable. "They thought I was silent," she began, "but every wound carries a voice. Every day I was locked away, something inside me kept speaking, not in words, not at first, but in memory, in line, in shadow." The audience leaned in. Laura paused, unfolding the paper with both hands. "They called me unstable. They told the world I didn't exist, but I was always there. And if you're listening, if you've ever been told to be quiet, to stay small, to vanish, I want you to hear this." She looked up. "I'm still here." The room went still, then rose in thunder. Applause shook the glass. Veronica watched from the front row, tears on her cheeks. Emily stood beside her, heart thudding in her ribs. For the first time in a very long time, Laura stood tall, and she stood seen. The weeks that followed were filled with interviews, offers, invitations. But Laura accepted none. Instead, she returned to Macedon, to the garden, to the silence that had become hers to shape. One morning, she asked Emily to help her hang a mirror. It was a simple request. A new mirror for her bedroom wall. Plain, rounded edges. Nothing expensive. Just something to replace the one that had once held a camera behind the glass. They carried it upstairs together. Set it gently on the wall. For a moment, Lara stared at her reflection. Not with fear, not with suspicion, but with recognition. Emily stood behind her, waiting. Then Lara said softly, "No eyes this time." Emily nodded. "No eyes. Just light. Just her." She reached forward, pressing her palm to the surface. It didn't tremble. It didn't flicker. It reflected only what was real. A girl who had vanished into darkness, clawed her way through memory, and returned carrying every fracture like a badge. They stepped back. Lara exhaled. Behind her, a lavender breeze drifted through the open window. The video ends there. A single silent shot. The mirror hung cleanly on the wall. No wires behind it, no secrets, no surveillance. Just Lara's quiet reflection and the sunlight catching the edge of her smile. A smile that didn't ask permission. A story that no longer whispered, but stood and remained.